Hi, welcome to Life's Worth Remembering. My name's Trevor Cole, and I'll be hosting a podcast series called Life's Worth Remembering, and where our guests share their life stories, because everyone's got a story to tell. Today's story is David Edwards. David being a prominent inventor in the packaging industry. David was born in August 51 in Pontypridd, which is the same place as Tom Jones came from, and David has been involved in many, many inventions over the years. I think 70 patents he's been attributed to David. First of all, I'd like him to introduce himself. So over to you, David.
Thank you, Trevor. So, yes, born in Wales, apparently the same town as Tom Jones, Pontypridd, Ynysybwl. I was the middle lad, much to my issues sometimes. So I had a younger brother, obviously, an older brother. My younger brother, Andy, was sort of like a partner in crime, very much like me at the time, not overly bright. My older brother, John, he was the complete opposite. For his sins, he went to public school. He had any amount of money spent on him by his father. So he was pretty bright, the complete opposite of myself and my younger brother.
How would you describe the younger version of yourself then?
The younger version, extremely shy, very timid, very, very nervous sort of guy. Until I think things started happening for me. Even at a very young age, I didn't know it, but I had strange interests in creating things, solving problems. I just seemed to have an intuition at a very young age. I'll give you a very good example. My mother, bless her, when my father was in the Air Force, was heavily pregnant. So I went on a jet plane, well known today, it was called the Comet. They didn't know at the time it had metal fatigue. We were just beginning down the runway. I think it was in Changi, Singapore. And I turned around to my mum when we were all strapped in. I said, Mum, I think this plane's going to have a big problem. And my mum said, oh, God, what do you mean a problem? I said, well, I think something's going to happen, like crash, or there's going to be a lot of rumpus and things going on in the plane. Oh, my God, she said. She said, well, I hope not. Anyway, so the plane, the engine started up in this jet. We started a taxi down the runway. There was a huge squealing of brakes. All the lighting in the central column completely crashed into the aisle, and there was a whole plane of screaming women, pregnant women. And I said to me, turned around to me, Mum, I said, Mum, I told you so. I said, oh, your dad's going to kill you when you get home. But, you know, that was a typical scenario where I was sort of like reading into what was going to happen. Another scenario, much to my father's distaste, was that every time we went out for a family run in the car, went shopping or somewhere like that, I used to say to my dad, I said, Dad, we're going to have a puncture. For God's sake, we're not, are we? And he didn't really believe me. And anyway, 5 minutes later, you'd hear the strange noise of the back wheel or whatever. We'd have a puncture. And the funny thing was, in the end, he said, do not, when we go out in the car, do not mention the P word. Just don't mention it. So I did seem to have this sense of premonitions of things that was going on at the time. And funny enough, I was told in my working life that I was visionary by Cambridge consultants when I did the Myers-Briggs test amongst all my fellow colleagues at the time. So there was a lot going on in my younger years, and even in my working life, there was something there all the time that was different.
So, David, during that period of your childhood, was there any sort of, I guess, the inspirations that were coming to you, and also what you like to do as a person?
Yeah, so as a child, I had this strange fascination, much to my father's horror, for explosives. And I'm talking about quite a young age, because my father, with one of his Air Force colleagues, were talking about fireworks, and because I love fireworks, as most children do. And he said to my father, you can make your own fireworks, David, and your own explosive. You don't have to go and buy all these things in the shops, and they're not that exciting, and so on and so on and so on. And I said, cool, wow, that's amazing. But how do I do that? And he said, well, you have to make your own gunpowder. I said, oh yeah, I'm up for doing that. So my father was all agog and listening as well. And he said, well, how do I do that? And he said, well, it's simple. You need some sulfur, saltpeter, and carbon. I said, oh yeah. So he said, what you need to do is, and of course you could do that in these days. Go to your local chemist, go to Boots or somewhere like that, and ask for some sulfur, saltpeter, and carbon. So I thought, brilliant. Then he told me what I do with it, what sort of percentages I use, and how to make it all up, and with adhesives and things like that to make it really go. So I thought, wow, this is so exciting, because I wasn't very bright in those days. I eagerly waited till Boots was open, our local chemist, and I was all excited. And I said to he said, oh, how can I help you? And I said, oh, I want some sulfur, saltpeter and carbon, please. And I was just waiting for him to go and get it all from, hand it all over. And he said, what, to make gunpowder with? And I said, yeah, that's right. He says, bugger off. And
You'd have been caught on CCTV camera now, and you'd have been
he really
arrested.
he really wasn't fun, and he thought, what an idiot. So I was so disappointed, and I went home, and my dad came back from work, and he said, oh, how'd you get on today? And he said, well, I got thrown out of Boots. In fact, the guy was really annoyed. I said, well, what's the problem? What happened then? And he said, well, I went in. He said, well, what did you say? And I said, well, I asked for all the ingredients. He said, you idiot. You didn't just ask for them in a list. He said, I thought you had a bit more sense than that. So that was the sort of thing that I did. And anyway, I did finally get my hands on all these ingredients, and I made some pretty impressive things. And in those days, there was a man from Uncle on television where they're always blowing door locks off and things
Yeah, I
like
remember
that.
that.
So I went into this old house years ago, as you did as kids. I blew all the door locks off using using string as a time fuse. And I was having a whale of a time, and I was detonating things under the water. And when I did chemistry, I wasn't particularly bright, but I remember making hydrogen and chlorine. I combined them all together and made myself a little miniature hydrogen bomb in my dad's summer house. He came home, and he found a great big hole in the ceiling with a green stain from the chlorine. And he said, I've seen it all now. But he went in, and he was laughing, because he just thought, he thought about, that's exactly the sort of thing that he would do in those days. And when we lived in Swansea in Wales, unfortunately, we lived next to the Chief Constable of Swansea at the time. And again, I was always making explosives, and I made these rockets with time fuses on, and other rockets that would come off and take off and do their own thing. And I ended up with such a high, heavy payload on it that it leant over like Jodrell Bank onto his glass house next door. And you can imagine, it all went in, huge explosion. And of course, he knocked on the door, and my dad invited him in. He said, oh, can I have a word with you, Eddie? And he was in his uniform at the time. And they would sit there with the whiskey, the pair of them. And he said, look, I don't want to keep complaining. He said, but you could see what's happened. And of course, my dad had a smile on his face. He had to tell me off. But he could see the funny side, because things were so different in those days. So people were so open, friendly. It wasn't like it is today. And of course, the Chief Constable probably did exactly the same thing when he was a kid. So it wasn't a big deal. And I think deep down, my dad was proud of me for being so inquisitive and inventive, because he was then telling me about his mates that would go and blow their ends off, taking all the ends off matches and things like that. So again, these were all things of being a nervous little child. I was still very creative, and I just had to do these things because they were exciting, like inventing.
I don't know, that's funny, really, about the bomb making. I guess there was other childhood escapades.
Absolutely.
And what did you do? I think one of the things that you mentioned to me was about your days as a child while your father was in the RAF and getting the hands on the controls of a plane.
Yeah, it was. It really was a one-off, and I can remember it to this day really vividly. He said to me, Dave, he said, I've organised for you to have a trip in a plane. And I didn't really know what he was talking about, or what he had in mind. He drove me to the Air Force Base in Changi. He introduced me to a mate of his, a fellow officer, who seemed really nice, and I can remember him to this day. He says, right, come with me then, Dave. And we clambered up into the cockpit. And he said, right, you sit there at the controls. And I thought, wow, I was surrounded by all these dials and instruments and the main levers that you pull back for the engines. And he says, right, now I'm going to put these headphones on, because so that I can hear and different things. And he said, just do everything I asked you to, Dave, and we'll be fine. And I thought, Christ, I went gulp. I remember my bum twitching at the time, even as a kid. He says, right now, he started firing up the engines, and the power and the noise. It was amazing, and I saw all these dials moving. And he says, right now, put your hand on this main lever. So I did, and he put his hand over mine to pull it back. And I could feel the engines, because we were already at the point of takeoff. He'd already aligned the plane up and everything. He was pulling the levers back, I thought, wow. And the engine noise was phenomenal. And off we went. I thought, I was just taking everything in. I thought, God, what an experience this is. And how proud I was and excited. But the next minute, I heard these sirens. And I thought, oh, where are all these sirens coming from? And of course, I managed to look over and I saw all these flashing lights of police cars and different things. And I said to the pilot, I said, oh, what's going on there? And he said, shit. He said, I didn't think of telling them. So what do you mean? He said, he said, I should have told him. And anyway, they surrounded the plane and pulled up to one side and they were waving him down and he put his head through the window because obviously it was open then anyway. We're only on the ground. He said, what's the problem? He said, you're the problem. He said, all we see is this little head at the window. He said, what are you doing? He said, I'm giving Eddie's son a little run down the runway. He said, well, you might have told us, mate. So anyway, it was all sorted. I'm sure they had a few drinks in the mess, but what an experience. And to see all those flashing lights, I'll never forget it to this day. It was absolutely brilliant.
Bit of an adrenaline rush.
It
With all
certainly
that
was.
power of the engines and
But just
lights
talking to you
coming on
about, but just talking again now, all these years later, it brings it all back. It was an amazing experience. And of course, you can imagine telling all my schoolmates. I don't think some of them completely believe me, but it was for real. It was amazing, and I was so grateful to my father at the time.
Unbelievable. Not many people are going to have that sort of experience, David, I tell
No,
you.
I'll tell you what, it was a lot more interesting than my schoolwork at the time.
And what were your parents like? I mean, were they strict?
They were amazing people. I was most fortunate to have an amazing mum and dad. They were totally different. My dear old mum used to be a mental nurse in the war. She went through Dunkirk and things like that. Lots of very, very vivid memories. My dad was a squadron leader in the Air Force, extremely strict, brought us up to believe in honesty, integrity, and timekeeping. You'll think it's funny nowadays about timekeeping, but to this day, I can't go anywhere without looking at a watch. And in those days, the father said it was even rude to turn up for an interview even too early. It had to be absolutely on the dot. And even to this day, I haven't changed one little bit. So in my business life, if someone turned up for a meeting and they were late, I regarded it as the utmost of rudeness. And I used to tell them so. Didn't always help, but there you go. Particularly if they're a lot more senior than me, I just told them.
And what was the impacts on your siblings, your brothers?
Brothers, my older brother resented it. He was always having rows with my father, but my father didn't batch an eyelid. My younger brother, we both went along with it, and we very much did as we were told, because what he told us, believe it or not, was correct at the time.
Right. And sort of, I guess your father had quite a big influence on you. And did you go to school in Pontypridd?
No. So
No.
that was the interesting thing about my life. I said I was Welsh in theory, so I spent probably about 3 or 4 weeks in Wales, not long after being born. As a young lad, I jumped on an aeroplane with my parents to Singapore, where we were based for 3 or 4 years in Changi.
And was that down to his being in the forces?
Yes, that was when he was in the RAF, and we were based in Changi, very interesting historical place, even to this day. And my father's married quarters was actually right opposite Changi Jail, which I remember very well as a little whippersnapper. Quite a daunting,
And so
frightening place.
And that's in the early days. That's where you went to school, was it?
Yes.
Initially,
So
yeah.
that didn't help, of course, because in those days it was so hot in Singapore that we only went to school in the mornings. So, my education, I wasn't particularly bright anyway, so it didn't help only going to school in the mornings. And when I came back to the UK, I had to have loads and loads of extra tuition, loads of extra help just to learn to read and write. And when I was at school, all my mates used to laugh at me, and they all said to the teacher, how come David's allowed to do, printing, and he doesn't do joined up like writing like we do? And of course, the teacher didn't like to say I couldn't bloody do it because I was still learning. So it was very humiliating. I used to get ridiculed. I used to get bullied a lot. I was always being beaten up. But that was the good thing. My dear old dad, when I used to tell him that I'd been beaten up at school and was very upset, he taught me then, as he did, self-defense. And he said, son, you can't let people walk all over you at life. You have to stand up for yourself. So he literally teach me that you can't be bullied. He told me about how he was bullied at school and used to get the cane from the headmaster as regular as clockwork for sorting out the school bully. So I think that was something I took over in my schooling life. Any bullies that came up, and I was only a little whippersnapper, I took them on. I didn't always win, but I got better and better at it. And in the end, I got caned for doing the same thing.
I think if you do start to hit back, then the bullies effectively will back off you anyway, don't they? So, but in that
Yes.
time period, I mean, your schooling itself, was that the like the beginning of your school life, and how did you get on through your exams and that sort of thing during that period? Was you bright? Did you pass your exams?
I think the simple answer is I virtually didn't do any exams because there was no point. In the UK, when I came back to the UK, they had what was, you might remember, as 11 plus. I was excused for doing that because there was absolutely no point at all, because I would have failed miserably. So sadly, my father had to spend an absolute fortune on me. Lots of private tuition every night, which was quite stressful for me, a lot of hard work. I went to endless private schools that cost my father an absolute packet, and that each report used to come through that my dad used to dread. They said, David's a lovely lad, but he's very backward, a lot of learning difficulties, and he's going nowhere fast. But my father never gave up. He kept going and going and going. He encouraged me. And simple things like learning fractions, he used to bribe me. So when I was in Singapore, to learn my tables, I would get so many dollars. I think it was $5 for each table. I could remember absolutely off by heart, forwards, backwards, whatever. And in the end, I was so bloody good at it that when we were learning it at school, I could actually do the tables for the other kids. I couldn't do anything else, but I could do the tables. So my father, bless him, he stuck with it time and time again, and he pushed me through, my education.
So you were fairly lucky then, really, in that respect, because having somebody to push you through, and also having the opportunity to do the private lessons as well, is
Yes.
something that helped you through. And so obviously things must have changed for you, David, because you turned into quite a prominent inventor.
Yes, so it all happened via my dear old mum because a job appeared in the local paper in the Hertfordshire Mercury at the time, and it said assistant buyer, British Oxygen Company in Harlow. And of course, my mum got hold of this advert and she says, Dave, she said, look at this. I said, for God's sake, mum, they want God knows how many A levels, blah, blah, blah. And you've got to go on then to college to get more. I said, I haven't got a cat's chance in hell. She said, look, trust me, you can't have that sort of attitude. Do it for me. Go along to the interview. This was, if you like, the beginning of my life and the beginning of things. I went along, saw the personnel woman, which you did in those days. She was very abrupt, very rude. And she said to me, I don't even know why you're up here for interview, but the chap that you would work for is interested in your background, your parents and things like that. And strangely enough, I wouldn't give you my time, but he wants to have a walk with you round Harlow Town to see what you're all about. So this was the sort of thing that happened in those days. So I had a walk with him for about half an hour. We discussed all sorts of things. And he said to me, David, I like you. How would you like to come and work for me? And I said, well, I'm told by your personnel I'm not qualified. He said, well, we'll help you with that. Are you interested? So I got called over to personnel. I was offered the job. And, the guy, my boss was amazing. We were like partners in crime. He taught me lots of different disciplines. I went to college with him to do accounts, which I absolutely hated. So did he. So we went scarving off to the pictures together and things like that. But that was how my life began, if you like. I started, and during my time at British Auction, they had lots of problems. I started solving their problems in production and things like that. And then a job came up at Hoffman the Roche in Welwyn Garden City. Again, my mother saw this advert, said, David, you've got to apply for this. I said, look, Mum, they want, God knows, they want a degree, ideally, or certainly to be well down the road for getting a degree before they're even going to look at me. I said, well, you told me that with British Oxygen, I want you to go. So I went along, had a long interview with them, and they didn't say anything at the time. I got a letter saying, look, we've interviewed a lot of people. You haven't got the qualifications, but you've got something that we want. I was invited back and they said, look, if we educate you for 3 years to get the diploma in packaging, you've obviously got to get it because we're investing in you. What do you think? I thought, wow. I accepted the job, and my poor old dad, bless him, He said, I heard him say to my dear old mum, he said, God, I'm worried. He said, if he fails after 3 years, he's going to be out in his ear. He's going to be so deflated, and we'll have a hell of a job dealing with him. Anyway, so I took the job. I went from strength to strength. I sorted out, they had an ample line for their Valium, as it was known in those days. And one day they had a huge problem. All the lines were all getting jammed up. And I said to the guy, I said, funny enough, I think I know what the problem is. He said, really? He said, well, go down there. Don't tell them how to do their job or anything like that. And I said, no, no, no. He said, come back and tell us what you think the problem is. Of course, I came back. I said, well, it's easy. They're doing this wrong. They're doing that wrong. And you can solve it by doing this and doing that. I said, wow, that's amazing. So they did it. They told what the engineers to do. And I went down, had a chat with them myself. They solved the whole problem that all these experts, world experts, just couldn't solve. And then I did the same thing for Rome Poulenc, Mayenbacher, as it was in those days. They had similar lines, had similar problems. I just solved it. And then one day, this is how it all started. They had a huge problem in agrochemicals. I wasn't even working for them at the time. They said, David, we want you to apply for an internal job as research and development manager. I said, well, I don't know anything about research and development. No, but you've got something. You solve all these problems. We want you to apply for the job and give it a go. And we're telling you
So
now,
David,
you'll get...
Just there, when
Yeah.
you talk about these problems that you're solving, when you're dealing with that, did it just come as a vision, or because it seems like you just seem to hit the nail with these problems and have a solution for it, or was it something a bit more calculated?
No, it's a good
in the way that
question,
you
Trevor.
approached it.
It was the way I approached it was absolute common sense. And to this day, when I talk about inventions to people, youngsters, university students, etc., I said there's actually no such thing as an invention. It's common sense. It's actually taking common sense ideas out of other industries and putting them together, and then you make something workable and doable. So the solutions were actually something I saw very, very quickly. I'd work out what the problem was, look at it, build up pictures in my mind, and immediately I could see how to solve the problem. Hence, in my working life, I had to work for a lot of academics, a lot of doctors, a lot of PhDs. I used to get really annoyed with them because I said, look, the solution is obvious. David, don't tell us what's obvious. We've got PhDs. You've got 1 O-level, at that time. He said, don't be ridiculous. I said, well, that's the solution. That's the answer. Trust me. And in the end, reluctantly, some of the engineers did what I told them to do, and they came back and said, regardless of what you think of David, it works. So this reputation followed me around, and I just solved problems.
So what would, when you look back on your initial inventions, what was the one that stood out most to you that really sort of kick-started your whole life in that respect, in this whole world of inventions?
Right.
Of being
So
this entrepreneur inventor.
when I got the R&D job in Essex, I worked with a chemist who was a lovely guy. He showed me some ideas, some thoughts, and at the time, the agrochemical industry was in a huge mess. The government had turned around and said, look, guys, unless you can provide a safe solution for holding pesticides, which can be very dangerous. A farmer gets them spilt down his trouser leg or whatever, they're toxic. And, it can be a nightmare. And that used to happen. So I looked at the problem and I saw very, very quickly when I was in a laboratory with my colleague, a solution. So I worked with my colleague. I said, look, let's put the liquid in a polyvinyl alcohol water-soluble bag, which people would laugh at if you think about it. And of course, it doesn't dissolve. It didn't dissolve the bag from the inside, but of course, water-soluble film dissolves readily in water. So when you throw it in a spray tank, it's holding the liquid, but as soon as it hits the water, it dissolves. So it's a unit dose that's completely safe to the operator. And that very same concept is used globally now in a multi-million pound business for holding detergents. Again, something that I said at the time was unbelievably obvious. And they got me with my colleague to work with them, and we put it out all over the world.
And did you have to get these things painted at the time?
Yes. So
was there painting
yes,
associated with that?
Yes. So when I worked for the French, when I did this early work, of course, the solution, which was pretty amazing and very radical at the time. I didn't even know what a patent was, hardly. And they said, David, you and your colleagues didn't get a visit this afternoon. He's flying in from Lyon. He's the head patent lawyer, and he's bringing some agents from London to talk to you. So we all sat down in my office, and the guy said, look, what you've done is really clever, and we want to patent it. And I said, well, don't be bloody ridiculous. There's nothing clever about this at all. It's bloody obvious. And he said, but the French guy in his very broad French accent, he says, David, he said, you're only a junior in this company. I'm the patent lawyer for the whole company. Don't tell me what I can patent, what I can't. He said, this is a really good invention, and so is a lot of other things you're going to do. We're going to patent the whole lot. I said, well, that's fine, but you're wasting your money. Anyway, they did, and they got granted patents very, very quickly. And I went on. I mean, I'm 74 now. In the last 3 years, I think I've got to nearly 70 international patents with my name on them. Not just in the pesticide industry, some tamper-evident anti-counterfeit technologies. I even say they had a problem with poisoning. Little children were getting poisoned with a product called Tylenol, a famous painkiller. So I worked with a Professor Arnold Beckett at the time, who was a lovely guy, and I came up with a special seal on the gelatine capsules. We replaced them from gelatine to polyvinyl alcohol, the same water-soluble film, but it was injection molded. Instant success. It held no static in production, so it saved loads and loads of issues and problems. And hence, we started patenting like there was no tomorrow. And there was a whole load of different inventions all from that. And also holding detergents in injection molded capsules as well. That all took off. To this day with the big companies.
And that all stemmed from that, each one of these patents has stemmed other patents that come off of that. Yeah, is that correct?
Yes, it all flew off those. They were called divisionals. It was just one after the other.
And what was your main drivers during that time? I mean, you must have got excited about the role that you had and the life that you were starting to live in terms of inventing these products and the kudos that was coming from it in the scientific community.
Yeah. So bearing in mind what I said earlier on, the 1O level man, I very, very quickly started growing within the company. When they had their major problem with a multi-million-pound business, they looked at me for solutions. And the accountant said, David, right now you're the only person in the company that can blow their budget, as you're doing very well at the moment. So I literally flew all over the world, Canada, America, Denmark, and all these countries, and set them up in all these different technologies. And I was on like a crusade, a mission, if you like, and I was virtually non-stoppable. No one could tell me that I couldn't do it. I just did it. And people believed in me, as I did myself. And people were spending millions of pounds on equipment in Canada and America. And one guy, the chap that was in charge of Canada, he said, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. He said, but whatever it is that I need to order, just tell my guys and I'll order it. He said, I've never spent millions of pounds on equipment and I don't even know what I'm buying, but I'm just going to do it. And he did it. I'm not saying they didn't have problems, they had lots of technical issues, but I helped them sort those out as well. So I was on a mission, I was on a roll, we just did it. But I really believed in myself.
So just going back to your achievements, and I wanted to cover off what your proudest moments were during that, about looking at all the inventions that you've done and that sort of thing. It's nice to know and understand what your proudest moments was during that period.
Sure. I think the first really meaningful day for me was when I found studying really tough, as I'm sure I've told you before. I got a letter through the post saying that I'd actually passed all the exams for the Institute of Packaging at the time for their qualifying examination, which meant I could use the letters after my name. I was just so proud of that moment, but equally very sad because I think I told you that when it came through the letterbox, it was actually the day of my dad's funeral at the time. But it was a day I will never forget because I was so proud.
And what about the achievements in terms of the awards
Sure.
that you got? You sent me pictures of those, and we'll probably be sharing those later. But I just wanted to get an idea of your, that time.
Sure. So first, just before that, in 1988, I was awarded fellowship of that very same Institute of Packaging. And that was an event I will never forget because the guy who gave it to me, he said to me, David, what you've done is pretty amazing. And he said, "You're actually our youngest fellow ever elected." So that made me feel very, very proud and excited. 1990, I went on then to become Innovator of the Year. That was the highest recognition in my field at the time. And I was incredibly proud at that moment to get that achievement.
Amazing achievement at the time, yeah. Especially with the background that you had previously and then going into this,
Yes,
almost, you know, reluctantly at some point because you got into it through just providing solutions for organisations and then getting into this whole process of inventions. And then out of this
sure.
now, you get that award. It's amazing.
Yeah. And then, it didn't end there, not so long ago. I mean, obviously, I'm knocking on now, but in 2018, I was presented with the highest award in my profession, which was known as the Frank Payne Award. Frank Payne was the author of all the packaging magazines all around the world for people to study packaging, etc., etc. It was the first award of its time, presented every 2 years, and they presented that with me in London, and it's in recognition for the highest achievement globally for the packaging industry.
That's excellent. And I think that everyone that's listening will appreciate that, what an achievement that is. Those are the things that we have got photographs of, and we're in supporting information for that people can have a look at the end of the podcast. So thanks for that. In terms of your own family, how many children have you got now then, David? Any of those taking in your footsteps?
Well, funny enough, I've got my son, Ross. Bless him. He's a painter and decorator. Very proud of what he does. I'm very proud of him. I've got a daughter who's the complete opposite. She's a senior job in the NHS. And in some ways, Tara was very similar to me. And ironically, it wasn't long before I found out that Tara, bless her, she has very much the same innovative gift as what I have. And one day we sat down, I showed her one of my inventions, and she said to me, "Dad, that's a stupid idea. I've got a much better way of doing it than that." So she drew these other things for me, and I said, "Blimey, that's bloody good. I'm impressed." So I told my American colleagues at the time I was working for, and they said, "Oh, God, David, that complicates things. So she's going to have to be an inventor as well. We're going to have to change all the paperwork around." So Tara's actually named on one of my inventions. But the irony is, she's creative in her own job, in what she does today, but she's never really gone down the same road. But we're all very different. We're all very different. But it's there.
Very much so.
It runs in her blood too.
That's great. And taking that forward, obviously, you're gone past your retirement age in terms of state pension. Are you still working, and do you still have a gift and want to carry on with what you're doing?
Well, I retired, I guess, by the fact that I don't work with my American colleagues anymore about 2 years ago. But deep down in my mind, I'm always creating things. I'm always thinking. And there's one particular thing, it's a wounds dressing that I'm passionate about. If that went my way or circumstances change, I'm sure I'd bite the bullet if I got with the right people, and I'd run with it. It's just forever in my mind, and I'm forever coming up. Even simple everyday solutions, I have to find an answer for it.
Obviously, your mind's rushing around during this period, and you're running all over the place. Obviously, in the early days to put these inventions into place. Did that have an impact on your family at all and your relationships?
Yes, interestingly enough, I'm not the easiest person in the world to live with, as my wife will tell you, and perhaps my children as well. Um, About 3 years ago, I had some counselling, and within the second session, the lovely lady said to me, "David, I've got to tell you, but you're autistic." And I said, "Christ, how do you know that?" And he said, "Well, it stands out like a sore thumb." She pointed it all out, and I said, "Good God." She said, "Yeah, you're on the spectrum for high-functioning autism." And I said, "Well, blimey," I said, "I'm over the moon." And she said, "I can see why you're over the moon, because because to you it explains a lot of things." I said, "Well, yeah, it explains absolutely everything. Probably how I was able to do it because I did lots of research. Because lots of the inventors today, they're all on the spectrum. I mean, Einstein, all the people that came up with the wacky ideas were innovative, etc., etc. They were autistic. So I was so grateful because that explained so many learning difficulties that my dad was grappling with at the time, and my mum. As I was saying, I'm not the easiest person in the world to live with.
And in those days, years ago, I mean, it's more regular now, but everyone gets diagnosed with something, whether it be ADHD or autism, that sort of thing. But we didn't have that at that time, I guess. And certainly, only being diagnosed now means that you now have something to hang your hat on and say, no, that's the reason why. But, if it was today, you would have been diagnosed a lot faster, yeah.
I was going to say, this is all about learning. This interview about people and so on and so on. I would say to people that have autism or they're on the spectrum, don't regard it as a disadvantage. Use it to your advantage. It means you can see things that other people can't see. Yeah, you might be a bit irritating at times, but capitalize on it.
And sort of in your life, though, I mean, having that as and not realizing it at the time, because in terms of, did you have any, did you have a tough chapter in your life where you needed to get through?
Yeah, I had lots of very, very tough times. I think one of the hardest times, because I said to you, my dear old dad and my parents were so kind and considerate to me. My dad said to my mother, as I probably said earlier on, that if David fails those exams, he's finished. It will destroy him. And my mother said, well, I guess you're right. He died very suddenly, which was a huge impact on me. I just felt so alone at the time. And the funny thing was, the day of the funeral was actually, the letter came through the letterbox, and my wife gave it to me. I opened it. I was terrified. And it said, you passed all the exams. Of course, I was over the moon. But of course, I couldn't tell my father. That was shit. That was really shit.
Yeah, because it's sort of the recognition that you wanted to have with him, that you'd finally got through and achieved that through adversity.
Absolutely.
You managed to get those exam passes, yeah. I can understand that. And if you could tell the world one truth from your experiences, what would that be?
That would be the one truth is you really should believe in yourself. Your life's short. It's very, very short. We're all born with something. Whatever it is that you've got, use it to your benefit and don't give up.
I think that's a good point. And several of the people I've interviewed recently have come back with very similar comments in that it's about believing in yourself to take yourself forward regardless of your situation. The podcast is called A Life Worth Remembering. What would you like to be remembered for?
I think I'd like to be remembered, actually, it's probably a bit arrogant or a bit headed, for beating all odds, because you really can beat all the odds. People can stereotype you. I was stereotyped at school. I was ridiculed. I was bullied. Don't let them do it to you. In believing in yourself, you can help other people. That's something I love to do now. If I can ever help youngsters through my work, and I have done, I've given them a lot of encouragement to take the exams and to do things.
Well, I think that's a great point there, David. And what advice would you like to leave before we finish the podcast and move on? What advice would you like to give anyone out there? I'm not just talking about the children, but also anyone out there that the things that you've experienced in life, because we've come through a big transition in life really over the last 50 years. So much has happened, but we can still learn from our experiences. Is there anything there that you would like to pass on?
I think I come back actually to believe in yourself. And, I think my father taught me that life's not all about taking. If you give back to other people, you get something, and so does that other person. So when you've got experience, pass on that experience to the youngsters and older people. Everyone needs help. I needed help. Help other people. That's what I believe, where you can.
I thank you for that, David. I think that's a great bit of advice for everybody. It's been a pleasure interviewing you today, and certainly your inventions will go on and actually probably be something a foundation for other inventors to go further on as well. But don't stop yourself, because if you've still got the ability to do that and offer inventions and solutions to things, then continue doing it, because it keeps you going, keeps you living, keeps you wanting to do more. So I'd like to thank you very much for today's session. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
So what is your story to tell? Life's had its ups and downs. when we're looking into your soul? Do we really know you that well? Tell me about the times of old, the lessons learned, the dreams you hold. How did you laugh? How did you cry? What did you leave behind? We all have a story to share, of joy, of love, of burdens we bear. So open your heart, don't keep it shelved. What's your story?